Well, 30 years ago, Brian and Bobby Houston started the Hillsong Church in a suburban school hall in the outer suburbs of Sydney. Today, it's an international phenomenon, generating millions in revenue worldwide. But serious questions are now being asked about what Hillsong is spending all that money on and why it's allowed to get away without paying any tax.
You say you're rich and have need of nothing.
They want to build the biggest church in the world.
This is a rich, rich church.
Money is a corrupting thing, and the love of money destroys families, it destroys homes.
That you have an eternal hope, that heaven is your home, and what a powerful promise that is.
What could you do with 55 million?
God, what we could do with that.
When you claim you're from God, what other higher authority can you work with?
They say they're not doing the wrong thing, just prove it.
There's money to be made in Jesus, lots of it.
One cash offering of $7.7 million.
And the best part is, it's all tax-free.
Everybody say taxes.
Who wouldn't like to start up an organisation that gives you eternal life and freedom from taxes as well?
Tonight, the truth about the Hillsong Church and how they're taking ordinary Aussie taxpayers for a ride.
People are really starting to ask questions about why they're going to work and paying tax, and, you know, these guys are going to work and not paying any at all.
We'll reveal the tax-free millions this mega church is making, the lavish lifestyles of its founders, Brian and Bobby Houston, and we've got the documents that show where all the money is really going.
This is part of a big, big worldwide movement which is really preying on people's greed and their need for some sort of spiritual salvation.
If there's any such thing as God's country, then this is it. This is Borkham Hills in Sydney's northwest. It's the closest thing Australia has to a Bible Belt. Thousands of middle-class families living the suburban dream. And down there, smack bang, right in the middle of it, is Hillsong headquarters. A $25 million monstrosity that looks more like an entertainment centre than a church.
Other Hillsongs have sprung up in Melbourne and Brisbane, where police are needed to manage the huge crowds who come every weekend. Inside, it's all about the show. There's rock music, huge video screens, and its charismatic frontman, Brian Houston.
For the favour and grace of God on your life. That's what I believe.
What sort of person is Brian Houston?
He's a very slick creation of his own making, I think. He would have been successful in almost any business, but he found Christianity, and that's been his real bonanza, I think.
Don't move back from being committed to turning it into pools of blessing.
Here you have to give to receive, and the more you give, the more God will like you.
It's about sowing so that we can reap, so that we can sow, that we can reap.
Every Sunday there are 84 services like this held around Australia and the world, each one raking in tens of thousands at a time. Places like New York, London and Paris now have a Hillsong, but it wasn't always like this.
When you first went there, did it look anything like it is today?
Oh, nothing at all. I guess Brian's still on stage, which is one part, but it was very quiet. There was a band. It was fairly low key for a Pentecostal church.
Brian Houston and his glamorous wife Bobby come from New Zealand. It was 30 years ago this year when they set up the Hills Christian Life Centre. Their first service was in a school hall. Just 45 people showed up. Tanya Levin joined when she was a teenager.
In the early days, there was very little emphasis on money. There were only a few hundred people. There were working class families, most of them, and it wasn't a focus at all.
The Hills Christian Life Centre would become Hillsong, where these days the talk is often about money and membership.
It's learn how to attract people. It's amazing how your finances will grow.
Brian Houston even wrote a book called You Need More Money. There's a constant call for funds to expand his church and his empire.
How generous are you? How generous are you?
They're very explicit about what they want. They want to recruit more people, and they want to raise as many funds as possible, because the more people that you have in, the more opportunity to fundraise.
Don't give
in a sense of like, well, what I did last year, how about let's have a new way of giving. For instance,
it's Sunday morning and we're undercover at this Hillsong service. Within minutes, the talk turns to money.
Tithe this year. And if you do tithe, how about do it online? It's a new way. It's different.
We're told to give more than we've ever given before, in the form of a tithe.
So how about this year? Do a new way. Give in a new way. Give joyfully. Give online. Give cheerfully. And you find, I tell you what, God will bless you. It's a new year. It's a new year. And let's expect that. All right?
What's the idea behind tithing and where does it come from?
10% of your pre-tax income, whatever that is. It's this idea that if you don't give, you're robbing God. And you don't want to rob God, do you?
What about people who can't afford to give? The unemployed, people on disability pensions, single parents. Are they let off the hook?
No. Everybody has to tithe. They will tell you that it goes back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and that's why Cain killed Abel, because he didn't tithe.
The lights dim and the buckets go around. People handing over cash and credit card details. How much do you give the church?
As much as I can. I give 10% as a base and then I give more.
I've seen much more blessing than I could ever have if I didn't give that 10% of my income to God.
The money being generated is astounding. A Current Affair has obtained copies of Hillsong's most recent financial documents, and tonight we can reveal just how much this megachurch is making and, more importantly, where they're spending it. In 2011, Hillsong made $28 million from tithes and donations, tax-free. The lucrative music arm of Hillsong earned them more than $7 million tax-free. Conferences earn more than $4 million tax-free. And their Bible colleges and courses a whopping $10 million tax-free. By the end of the year, Hillsong had reported its total revenue as $55 million tax-free.
Well, I guess everyone should just start a church and they can share the bounty as well. But I think in the meantime, people should feel genuinely a bit perplexed, maybe even outraged about this.
Hillsong takes advantage of an antiquated piece of legislation which says if you're a religion, it's the same thing as a charity, therefore you don't have to pay any tax. Investigative reporter Adam Shan from the Australian newspaper believes it's time Hillsong's tax-free status was reviewed.
Got an entity that really looks like a corporation, acts like a corporation, pays its staff like a corporation, yet is a not-for-profit religious organisation. Something wrong with that.
So just how much does Hillsong give to charity? Well, that's hard to know for sure because they don't make it clear. But according to the records we've obtained, in 2011, Hillsong paid $5.5 million to missions and overseas aid, although it doesn't explain what they are. We do know that its program called Life Aid Australia spent just $944,000, and another program to alleviate poverty and suffering around the world just $144,000. Remember, this from a total revenue of $55 million.
Why can't we know exactly how it was spent? Why can't we ask that question? Because they won't tell us. The law protects them. They can do whatever they want.
I don't have a problem with what church does with the finance that I give to it, because I trust their heart.
Do you believe that the money that you give goes to help other people?
I do.
Help those in need?
I do.
Help the poor?
I do.
Look, Hillsong is full of well-meaning, decent people who are caught up believing that they are contributing to the community, that they're helping other people. But I guess they don't realise they're just helping Hillsong.
What did Jesus say about money?
He had all his problems with people with money, you know, and used to talk about, sorry, I get a bit upset, but he used to talk about sit up the back and don't promote yourself and don't all this sort of stuff, but feed my sheep. And that's what we try to do here.
While Brian Houston does a lot of talking, the Reverend Bill Cruz does a lot of doing. Every day, his Loaves and Fishes restaurant in Western Sydney serves up 1,000 free meals to those who can't afford one.
We live hand to mouth, just like these people. We live hand to mouth. And
if we had millions of dollars coming through, we'd spend it, because this is for these people who come here are the poorest of the poor, the most needy, the most distressed. They're homeless, they're in and out of hospital, they're sick, all of these sorts of things. They need all this hope.
Bill Cruz believes that unless Hillsong spends its money directly on charity, then it should be made to contribute like the rest of us.
Well, I think it should be taxed. If it doesn't go to help the poor, the amount of money that come in should be taxed like anything else. It's a business just like anything else.
As the corporate prayer of believers together.
It's not just Hillsong. Phil Pringle's C3 Pentecostal Church pulled in $13 million in Sydney alone. Scientology earned $17 million, and the Seventh-day Adventists $70 million in the South Pacific region.
Every year, more than $30 billion leaks out of the tax system to these not-for-profits, or the expense of these not-for-profits. At this time, where we're in, deficit budgets, and we're seeing hospitals, roads, schools, their budgets being cut, this is money that could be going towards that. And I don't think it would harm Hillsong or any of the other churches to pay their fair whack like everybody else does, or at least should do in this system.
It says, render therefore to all their due. Taxes. Everybody say taxes. Taxes, to whom taxes are due.
How would you describe the lifestyle of Brian and Bobby Houston?
Oh, it's got to be just short of Jana Reinhardt. It's a luxurious lifestyle. It's an international, cosmopolitan, celebrity lifestyle.
Brian rides a Harley and travels the world earning money for his ministry.
When Brian Houston goes to speak at foreign churches, he's given what they call love offerings, which often can be, piles of cash that he carries away in a suitcase. The tax office has no idea about that. He's not asked to account for that in any way.
Not only are Brian and Bobby Houston living luxury lifestyles, they're also working the system to pay as little tax as possible. And here's how they're doing it. They've set up an entity called Leadership Ministries Incorporated, or LMI, and it has tax-free status. The Houstons own 2 properties and they sold them to LMI, so it doesn't have to pay any tax on them. Brian Houston has previously confirmed that he's paid $150,000 to be a pastor at Hillsong. Any money that he donates from that into LMI is tax-free. And then, of course, there's all that other money that he earns preaching around the world and selling all his books and DVDs. That all goes into LMI, you guessed it, tax-free.
Depending on its balance each year, but at times it's been $1 million tax-free expense account for the Houstons.
Do you think they're entitled to that tax-free lifestyle?
Of course not. It's quite similar to a pyramid scheme where they're making money out of other people's hard work, and the more people they can have under them working for them to promote them, the more they profit, and they profit hugely, and they profit internationally as well.
Brian Houston says that the church belongs to God, that it's overseen by God, it's all God's will and so forth, but that's not good enough. For the average taxpayer, they want to know that the ATO's had a look as well, not just God.
For the record, Brian Houston has previously said he and Hillsong staff pay personal income tax. In a recent review of the tax system, former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry recommended not-for-profit organisations be made to pay tax and receive direct government grants only for their charitable work. The government has recently released a discussion paper that proposes revenue made by religious organisations like Hillsong is taxed. What do you think? Should Hillsong and other not-for-profit organisations be made to pay tax on profits that do not go directly to charity? Join the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, or do send us an email.